In the YouTube video titled Lecture 24, Man-in-the-Middle Attack, Certificates and PKI by Christof Paar, Professor Paar begins by revisiting the key distribution problem, highlighting its paramount importance in the realm of Internet security. He underscores the inherent vulnerability of public key schemes to man-in-the-middle (MITM) attacks, wherein a malicious entity surreptitiously intercepts communication, masquerading as one of the legitimate participants. As a countermeasure to mitigate the risks associated with MITM attacks, Professor Paar introduces the concept of certificates. These digital artifacts function as digitally signed public keys, acting as a robust assurance mechanism for validating the authenticity of the key holder. Central to this process is the role of a certification authority, CA, a trusted entity entrusted with issuing certificates. The lecture elaborates on the practical implications of certificates. Professor Paar illustrates how a user, Alice, can acquire a certificate from a CA by submitting a request comprising her public key and identifying information. Upon verification of Alice's identity, the CA digitally signs the submitted information, generating a certificate. To elucidate the utilization of certificates in a real-world scenario, Professor Paar presents a Die-Hellman key exchange model. Alice, in order to establish a secure connection with Bob, transmits her certificate, which encapsulates her public key and identifying details. Subsequently, Bob validates the certificate by leveraging the CA's public key. Upon successful verification, Bob gains assurance about the authenticity of Alice's public key and can proceed with the Die-Hellman exchange. Professor Paar concludes by emphasizing the criticality of a secure setup process for certificates. While acknowledging the effectiveness of certificates in thwarting MITM attacks, he cautions against the assumption of complete invulnerability. He stresses that a compromised CA's public key can unravel the entire system, underscoring the necessity of stringent physical and cryptographic security measures to safeguard CA keys. From 0 minutes to 5 minutes of the video, Professor Paar begins by emphasizing the ubiquitous nature of certificates in Internet-related technologies. He posits that although most individuals may not engage directly with cryptography in their professional lives, certificates represent a fundamental component of secure communication within the digital realm. He introduces the overarching theme of the lecture, asymmetric key establishment, which aims to establish secure communication channels between two parties without relying on pre-shared secret keys. Professor Paar delineates two primary approaches to asymmetric key establishment: key agreement and key transport. Key agreement involves a collaborative effort where both parties contribute to the computation of a shared secret key. Conversely, key transport mandates that one party, Alice, assume responsibility for generating and disseminating the secret key to the other party, Bob. From 5 minutes to 5 minutes of the video, Professor Christof Paar delves into the pervasive vulnerability of public key cryptography to man-in-the-middle attacks. He introduces a hypothetical attacker named Oscar, who exploits the lack of authentication in public key schemes to intercept communications and impersonate either party, effectively establishing a shared secret key with each individual without their knowledge. This insidious attack poses a considerable threat to the integrity of online interactions. To mitigate this risk, Paar emphasizes the critical role of certificates in authenticating public keys. These digital credentials are issued by trusted authorities, known as certificate authorities, CAs, and serve as a binding mechanism linking a public key to a specific individual or entity. To illustrate the real-world impact of a successful man-in-the-middle attack, Paar uses the scenario of an online bank transfer. An attacker intercepts a request from Alice to transfer €10 to Bob's account, altering the transaction amount to €10,000 before forwarding the request to the bank. This example underscores the potential for severe financial consequences when the authenticity of public keys is compromised. From 10 minutes to 15 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the insidious nature of the man-in-the-middle attack, MITM, a pervasive and formidable threat that can compromise any public key cryptosystem. The crux of the vulnerability lies in the absence of authentication for public keys during the key establishment phase. Professor Paar illustrates this concept using a scenario involving Alice, Bob, and a nefarious attacker named Oscar. Oscar surreptitiously intercepts the public key exchange between Alice and Bob, cunningly substituting his own public key for Alice's. Unsuspecting, Alice proceeds to calculate a shared session key with Oscar, as does Bob, who has also been presented with Oscar's counterfeit public key. This elaborate deception results in Oscar, unbeknownst to Alice and Bob, possessing a common session key with both parties, thereby granting him unfettered access to their communication. The ramifications of this attack are profound, as Oscar now has the capability to eavesdrop on, decrypt, and even tamper with their messages, all without their knowledge. Professor Paar underscores the paramount importance of comprehending this attack, emphasizing it as a vital learning objective from the lecture. From 15 minutes to 20 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the concept of an active attacker, a more sophisticated threat than a passive attacker who can only eavesdrop on communications. He introduces Oscar, an active attacker who can not only intercept but also manipulate communications between Alice and Bob, thus establishing a man-in-the-middle attack. Oscar generates his own public and private key pairs, lowercase o for private and uppercase o for public. He then cunningly interjects himself into the public key exchange between Alice and Bob, surreptitiously replacing Alice's public key with his own, and similarly, Bob's public key with his own. This results in Alice and Bob unknowingly establishing a shared session key with Oscar, rendering their communication vulnerable. Professor Paar elaborates on the devastating implications of this attack by illustrating a scenario where Oscar could intercept a bank transfer request from Alice to Bob, surreptitiously altering the amount to be transferred from €10 to €10,000. He then highlights the paramount importance of authentication in mitigating the threat posed by this attack. He posits that the lack of authentication in the public keys being exchanged permits Oscar to effectively impersonate Alice and Bob, establishing shared keys with both of them without detection. Professor Paar underscores that this attack is not merely a theoretical vulnerability specific to the Diffie-Hellman key exchange protocol, but rather a universal threat applicable to any public key scheme. He emphasizes the urgent need for countermeasures, leading into the next topic: certificates. This segues into a discussion of how digital certificates can help address the vulnerabilities of public key cryptography. From 20 minutes to 25 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the concept of an active attacker, specifically focusing on how a malicious entity aptly named Oscar can effectively circumvent the security of a Diffie-Hellman key exchange protocol. Oscar, acting as a man in the middle, intercepts the communication flow between two legitimate users, Alice and Bob, and cunningly constructs his own public and private key pairs, represented by O for his private key and O for his public key. The professor emphasizes that Oscar surreptitiously replaces Alice's public key, A, with his own, setting the stage for a covert manipulation of the shared key. Alice, unsuspecting of Oscar's presence, proceeds to compute a session key, cow, by exponentiating Oscar's public key, O, with her own private key, A. Oscar, simultaneously, calculates the same session key, cow, by exponentiating Alice's public key, A, with his private key, O. This demonstration poignantly highlights the inherent vulnerability of Diffie-Hellman key exchange when faced with active attacks, as Oscar effectively acquires a shared key without either Alice or Bob being privy to his involvement. Professor Paar underscores the crucial aspect of Alice's unawareness. She mistakenly believes that she is securely sharing a key with Bob, oblivious to the fact that she is unknowingly communicating with Oscar. This scenario illuminates the critical necessity of implementing robust authentication measures within cryptographic protocols, as Oscar has successfully impersonated Alice in the key exchange process, creating a deceptive illusion of secure communication. To further explicate the potential ramifications of Oscar's attack, Professor Paar employs an analogy of a financial transaction. Alice, intending to transfer €10 to Bob's bank account, encrypts her request using the session key that she believes is shared securely with Bob. However, Oscar, intercepting the encrypted message, modifies the transfer amount to €10,000 and forwards it to Bob. This manipulation, undetectable to Alice and Bob, demonstrates the potential for malicious actors to exploit vulnerabilities in cryptographic protocols for fraudulent gains. The lecture's discussion on the susceptibility of Diffie-Hellman key exchange to active attacks, compounded by the absence of authentication in conventional digital signatures, underscores the critical need for more robust security mechanisms. Professor Paar promises to introduce solutions to these security challenges in the subsequent section of the lecture, setting the stage for a deeper exploration of certificates and public key infrastructure, PKI, as countermeasures. From 25 minutes to 30 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the ramifications of a man-in-the-middle MITM attack, emphasizing its pervasive nature by declaring that it can be leveraged against all public key cryptographic schemes. He utilizes the familiar scenario involving Alice, Bob, and Oscar to illustrate how an active attacker, Oscar, can exploit the key exchange process. Oscar's malicious intent lies in his ability to intercept messages and fabricate keys, undermining the security of the entire communication system. The crux of the issue lies in the lack of authentication for public keys. Oscar, with his mastery of MITM tactics, can impersonate Alice or Bob by substituting their public keys, A and B, respectively, with his own A and B. Consequently, he can compute a fraudulent session key, cow, that is identical to the key Alice believes she is sharing with Bob, cab. The calculation of cow is achieved by raising A to the power of 01, Oscar's private key. Similarly, Oscar can intercept Bob's public key and replace it with a forged counterpart to generate a deceptive session key, KBO. Professor Paar underscores the devastating consequences of this attack with a compelling example. He posits that Alice desires to transfer €10 into Bob's bank account. However, Oscar can manipulate this transaction by modifying the transfer amount to €10,000, demonstrating how MITM attacks can result in substantial financial losses. To mitigate the vulnerabilities inherent in this attack, Professor Paar asserts the necessity of robust authentication mechanisms, specifically through the implementation of digital signatures. Professor Paar astutely notes that even digital signatures are susceptible to MITM attacks if the process of public key verification is not adequately secured. He introduces the concept of a certifying authority, CA, as a trusted third-party entity that digitally signs public keys, resulting in the creation of a certificate. These certificates act as verifiable guarantees of the authenticity of public keys, bolstering the security of cryptographic systems. The speaker proceeds to highlight the critical importance of protecting root keys, which are the keys employed by CAs to sign certificates. He emphasizes that compromise of these keys would grant malicious actors the ability to issue fraudulent certificates, thereby undermining the entire trust infrastructure. Professor Paar concludes this segment by explaining that the establishment of a secure cryptographic system necessitates a trusted initialization process. This often involves pre-installed keys within software like web browsers. This foundational step plays a crucial role in establishing a secure communication channel and preventing future MITM attacks. From 30 minutes to 35 minutes of the video, the speaker delves into the implications of the man-in-the-middle MITM attack, emphasizing its pervasive vulnerability across all public key cryptographic schemes. The speaker underscores that the attack's efficacy stems from the attacker's capacity to surreptitiously interject their own public key into the key exchange process, effectively impersonating the legitimate sender. This malicious substitution enables the attacker to derive a shared session key indistinguishable from the genuine key, thereby rendering the communication channel susceptible to compromise. To illustrate the attack's potential for real-world harm, the speaker presents a compelling scenario involving an online bank transfer. The attacker, in this case, could surreptitiously intercept the transfer request and surreptitiously modify the transfer amount, potentially siphoning off significant funds. The speaker highlights that the attacker need not tamper with the entire message. Altering key components, such as the transfer amount in the provided example, suffices to execute the attack successfully. This starkly demonstrates the indispensable need for robust security mechanisms to thwart such insidious attacks. The speaker elucidates that digital signatures offer a potent countermeasure by enabling verification of the public key exchange, effectively negating the attacker's ability to substitute their own key with impunity. From 35 minutes to 40 minutes of the video, Professor Paar underscores the gravity of the man-in-the-middle attack, highlighting its ubiquity and applicability across all public key cryptography schemes. He elucidates that the attack exploits the inherent vulnerability of public key schemes by capitalizing on the lack of authentication inherent in these systems. The attacker can surreptitiously substitute their own fabricated public keys for legitimate ones, compromising the integrity of the communication. Professor Paar stresses the attack's pervasiveness, stating that it invariably succeeds, rendering it a formidable threat to the security of public key cryptography. The lecturer illustrates the attack with a practical scenario involving an online banking transaction, where an attacker intercepts the communication and deceptively modifies the transfer amount from €10 to €10,000. This manipulation exposes the attack's potential for facilitating financial fraud and underscores the imperative need for robust countermeasures. Professor Paar implores viewers to recognize that the man-in-the-middle attack transcends mere theoretical considerations and constitutes a tangible threat to secure communications in the real world. From 40 minutes to 45 minutes of the video, Professor Paar underscores the inherent vulnerability of certificates to man-in-the-middle attacks, despite their widespread adoption in contemporary network security protocols. He emphasizes that this susceptibility originates from the absence of robust authentication mechanisms for public keys within conventional public key cryptography paradigms. Oscar, the malicious actor, capitalizes on this weakness by surreptitiously intercepting the exchange of public keys and substituting them with carefully crafted, counterfeit keys. The fundamental deficiency lies in the fact that public keys are essentially represented as 248-bit numbers without any inherent verification mechanisms to confirm their authenticity. The speaker elucidates this vulnerability by employing a compelling scenario where Oscar intercepts a financial transfer request from Alice to Bob, subtly modifying the transfer amount from €10 to €10,000 by manipulating the message's underlying binary representation. Professor Paar then delves into the concept of a centrally trusted authority, CA, responsible for issuing certificates, which are essentially public keys augmented with a digital signature. He elaborates that this signature is computationally generated using the CA's private key, thereby necessitating Bob's verification of the signature using the CA's corresponding public key. This process ensures the authenticity and integrity of the public key associated with the certificate. From 45 minutes to 50 minutes of the video, the speaker delves into the critical importance of authentication within the context of the man-in-the-middle attack. He emphasizes that the vulnerability of the attack stems from the lack of inherent authentication associated with public keys, rendering them susceptible to manipulation. The speaker introduces the concept of a centralized, trusted entity known as a certifying authority, CA, to address this vulnerability. This authority acts as a pivotal component in the issuance of digital certificates. The speaker illustrates the process using an example where Alice seeks a protected public key. To achieve this, she sends a request, containing both her public key and identity information, to the CA. The CA then undertakes the crucial step of verifying Alice's identity, often relying on non-cryptographic mechanisms. Following this verification, the CA computes a digital signature. This signature, when combined with Alice's public key and identity information, forms the digital certificate. The speaker emphasizes that the digital certificate effectively embodies Alice's public key but with an added layer of security through the CA's digital signature. This signature serves as a safeguard, deterring Oscar's ability to forge or manipulate the certificate. From 50 minutes to 55 minutes of the video, Professor Paar elucidates the fundamental concept of a digital certificate, emphasizing its role as a crucial component of public key infrastructure, PKI, and its significance in mitigating vulnerabilities inherent in public key cryptography. He clarifies that a certificate essentially encapsulates a public key, accompanied by a digital signature generated by a trusted entity known as a certification authority, CA. The verification process involves utilizing the CA's public key to ascertain the authenticity and integrity of the certificate, thereby establishing a chain of trust. To obtain a certificate, an individual, like Alice in this instance, initiates a request to the CA, providing her public key and identifying information. While the lecture does not delve into the intricate details of identity verification, Professor Paar acknowledges its importance as a crucial step undertaken by the CA. Following this validation process, the CA securely binds Alice's public key and identifying information using a digital signature, generating a complete digital certificate. From 55 minutes to 60 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves deeper into the vulnerabilities of asymmetric key establishment protocols, particularly highlighting the man-in-the-middle MITM attack. He underscores the criticality of key authentication, emphasizing that certificates serve as public keys fortified with digital signatures. This authentication is achieved through the intervention of a centrally trusted authority, commonly known as a CA, certifying authority. The CA acts as a guarantor of authenticity by digitally signing the public key alongside the certificate holder's identification information using its own private key. The speaker elucidates the process of certificate verification, which entails employing the CA's public key to validate the digital signature, thus verifying the veracity of the public key. From 60 minutes to 65 minutes of the video, Professor Paar elucidates the crucial role of authentication in the realm of public key cryptography. He emphasizes that the man-in-the-middle attack exploits the vulnerability of unauthenticated public keys, enabling a malicious actor, Oscar, to surreptitiously substitute a legitimate public key with a fraudulent counterpart. This nefarious act can have severe repercussions, potentially leading to the misdirection of financial transactions, as illustrated by the example of a bank transfer. Professor Paar underscores that Oscar's malevolent actions don't necessitate direct intrusion into systems. Rather, he can simply replace the public key with a forged one, employing his own private key for digital signature. To mitigate this threat, Professor Paar introduces the concept of a certifying authority, CA, a trusted third party responsible for digitally authenticating public keys, ensuring their legitimacy. This process entails Alice, the sender, submitting a request to the CA, accompanied by her public key and identification information. The CA then undertakes the crucial step of verifying Alice's identity and digitally signing the supplied data. This resulting document, known as a certificate, empowers Bob, the recipient, to validate the authenticity of Alice's public key before engaging in any cryptographic operations. From 65 minutes to 70 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the critical issue of authentication within public key cryptographic schemes, emphasizing its crucial role in mitigating vulnerabilities like the man-in-the-middle attack. He asserts that public keys, in their unadulterated form, lack inherent authentication mechanisms, leaving schemes like Diffie-Hellman susceptible to adversarial interception and impersonation. To counter this inherent weakness, Professor Paar introduces the concept of a certifying authority, CA, a centrally trusted entity tasked with issuing digital certificates, which serve as verifiable attestations of authenticity. He elucidates the process of certificate generation. A user, Alice in this instance, submits a request to the CA, providing her public key and identifying information. The CA, after verifying Alice's identity through non-cryptographic means, employs its own private key to compute a digital signature, S sub A slash sub, over the concatenated public key and identifying information. This signature, along with the original information, comprises the certificate. Professor Paar underscores the pivotal role of the CA's private key in assuring the validity of a certificate. Bob, the recipient of the certificate, employs the CA's publicly available key to decrypt the signature S sub A slash sub. A successful decryption, confirming the signature's integrity, validates the public key's association with Alice. The professor cautions against using message authentication codes, MACs, for authentication in this context, as they rely on symmetric cryptography, reintroducing the key distribution challenges that public key cryptography aimed to address. He explores the concept of a root key, representing the CA's private key, highlighting its susceptibility to compromise. He vividly illustrates how acquiring the root key would empower an attacker to fabricate certificates, jeopardizing the entire system's security. Professor Paar then delves into the measures taken by organizations like Microsoft to safeguard their root keys, emphasizing the gravity of such vulnerabilities in real-world contexts. Finally, he underscores the criticality of a secure setup phase in which the CA's public key is initially authenticated, emphasizing that the system's security rests on the successful execution of this foundational step. From 70 minutes to 70 minutes of the video, Professor Paar delves into the vulnerabilities of asymmetric key establishment, particularly highlighting the ubiquitous threat posed by the man-in-the-middle attack. He elaborates on a scenario where Oscar, an active adversary, intercepts the Diffie-Hellman key exchange between Alice and Bob. Oscar surreptitiously generates his own public key, deceptively presenting it as Alice's, and transmits it to Bob. This cunning tactic enables Oscar to compute the same shared secret key as Alice and Bob, effectively granting him complete control over their communication. Professor Paar underscores the universality of this attack, asserting that it can be successfully executed against any public key cryptographic scheme. He posits that to mitigate this pervasive threat, public keys must be authenticated. He introduces the concept of certificates as the primary solution, emphasizing that a certificate essentially encapsulates a public key, digitally signed by a trusted authority, CA. This digital signature, generated using the CA's private key, serves as a mechanism for Bob to verify the authenticity of the public key he receives from Alice. Professor Paar then elucidates the process of certificate generation, outlining how Alice submits a request containing her public key and identity to the CA. The CA, in turn, digitally signs this information employing their private key. The resulting digital signature, coupled with Alice's public key and identity information, constitutes the certificate. This procedure effectively addresses the inherent vulnerabilities of public key cryptography, securing communication channels against man-in-the-middle attacks.